Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to talk about a newly released Chinese drama titled Rey Oculto as Mi Padre. This is not just a normal review video. In this video, I will explain the complete story in detail, from start to end, including all major twists, emotional moments, and hidden truths behind the characters. You will also understand how the story changes step by step, and what makes this drama so interesting for viewers who love emotional and fast-paced storytelling. So if you want a full, clear explanation of this drama in simple English, make sure you watch this video till the end. Let's get started. The story of Rey Oculto as Mi Padre begins in a world where power, wealth, and silence control everything. On the surface, everything looks normal, but beneath that normal life, there are hidden struggles, emotional scars, and secrets that will slowly change the fate of every character involved. At the center of this story is a young man named Caleb. He is not someone born into comfort or luxury. Instead, he lives a difficult life, working in a refinery where every day feels like a battle for survival. The environment around him is harsh, not only because of the physical work but because of the way people treat him. He is constantly looked down upon, disrespected, and humiliated by those who consider themselves higher in status. Caleb's life is defined by struggle. He wakes up every day with the same hope that maybe things will get better, but reality keeps pulling him down. The workplace is filled with people who take advantage of his silence. He doesn't speak much, not because he has nothing to say, but because he has learned that speaking often leads to more trouble than peace. Among those who trouble him the most is a young arrogant man named Enzo. Enzo comes from a privileged background and believes that power belongs only to those who show it through dominance. He often mocks Caleb, insults him in front of others, and treats him as if he is invisible. For Enzo, Caleb is nothing more than someone who exists to be pushed around. But what Enzo does not realize is that every action leaves a mark. Every insult, every humiliation, and every moment of pain is slowly building something inside Caleb. Not anger in a wild sense, but something deeper, a quiet transformation that even Caleb himself does not fully understand yet. While Caleb struggles in the refinery, there is another side of this story that remains hidden from everyone. A powerful man named Dominic watches everything from the shadows. To the world, Dominic appears as an ordinary figure living a simple life, but in reality, he is far from ordinary. He is a powerful oil magnate who has built an empire that most people can only dream of. However, Dominic has chosen not to reveal his true identity. Instead, he hides behind a simple lifestyle, observing the world quietly. His focus is not on showing power but on understanding people. And most importantly, he is watching Caleb closely. The reason behind Dominic's silence is not immediately clear. He does not interfere, he does not stop Caleb's suffering, and he does not reveal himself. Instead, he allows things to happen naturally, as if he is waiting for something to unfold on its own. This creates a mysterious tension in the story because the audience can sense that there is a bigger truth hidden behind everything. Caleb, unaware of his true connection to Dominic, continues his daily life of struggle. But deep inside, there is something different about him. Even though he is treated poorly, he does not break completely. There is a small fire inside him, a quiet resistance that keeps him moving forward even when everything around him tries to push him down. One day, after another exhausting shift at the refinery, Caleb finds himself standing alone, looking at the industrial machines and heavy smoke around him. In that moment, he feels trapped, not just physically, but emotionally as well. It is as if his entire life has been reduced to this one endless cycle of suffering and silence. Meanwhile, Dominic observes him from a distance. For Dominic, this is not just about watching a worker. It is about observing character, patience, strength, and survival. He believes that true strength is not shown through wealth or authority, but through how a person behaves when they have nothing. As the days pass, Caleb's situation slowly begins to shift. Small incidents start happening that hint at something bigger approaching. People around him begin to notice that there is something unusual about him, even though they cannot explain what it is. It is as if destiny itself is quietly preparing him for something unknown. At the same time, Enzo continues his arrogant behavior, unaware that the foundation beneath his dominance is not as stable as he thinks. His actions, though powerful in the moment, are slowly building consequences that will eventually return to him. The tension between these characters starts to grow silently. Caleb represents struggle and hidden potential. Enzo represents pride and ignorance. Dominic represents control and mystery. And all of them are connected by something deeper than they realize. The first part of the story ends with a sense of quiet uncertainty. Nothing has fully exploded yet, but everything is clearly moving toward a turning point. The audience is left with questions: who is Dominic really? Why is he watching Caleb? And what is the hidden truth that will soon come to light? As Caleb continues his difficult life at the refinery, the pressure around him slowly begins to increase. What once felt like a routine of suffering is now starting to feel heavier, almost like the environment itself is pushing him towards something unknown. The insults from Enzo and his group continue, but there is something different in Caleb's reaction now. He is no longer only absorbing pain, he is silently observing, learning, and remembering every detail. Caleb does not openly resist, but internally something is changing. Each humiliation is adding another layer to his character. He starts noticing patterns in people's behavior, especially how power influences actions. Those who have authority speak loudly, while those without it are forced into silence. This realization slowly begins to reshape how he views the world around him. Meanwhile, from a distance, Dominic continues to observe everything. He remains in the shadows, carefully studying Caleb's behavior. Unlike others, Dominic does not see Caleb as weak. Instead, he sees potential that is still unrefined. To Dominic, struggle is not a sign of failure, it is a necessary process of building strength. Dominic's silence is intentional. He does not interfere because he believes interference can destroy natural growth. He watches how Caleb reacts under pressure, how he responds to injustice, and how he controls his emotions when everything around him tries to break him. Every reaction is like a test, and Caleb does not even realize he is being tested. At the refinery, tensions begin to rise further. Enzo becomes more aggressive, encouraged by his friends who enjoy watching Caleb being pushed down. One particular day, a situation escalates when Caleb is blamed for a mistake he did not make. The accusation spreads quickly, and without evidence or support, Caleb is forced to accept responsibility for something he did not do. This moment becomes a turning point in his emotional journey. For the first time, Caleb feels something deeper than pain, he feels injustice in its purest form. It is not just about being insulted anymore, it is about being wrongly labeled and powerless to defend himself. That feeling begins to awaken a new strength inside him, one he has never fully used before. Dominic observes this moment closely. Instead of stepping in, he studies Caleb's silence. He notices the slight change in his expression, the way his eyes hold back emotion, and the way his body remains controlled despite inner frustration. To Dominic, this is important. It shows that Caleb is not breaking, he is adapting. Outside the refinery, the world continues to move with its own hidden layers of power. Dominic's business empire remains active, but he avoids direct involvement in public matters. Very few people know his real identity, and even fewer understand his influence. However, within his private world, Caleb remains his primary focus. There is a reason Dominic is so invested in Caleb, but that reason is not revealed yet. It is hinted through his constant observation, his silence, and the way he prioritizes Caleb's situation over everything else happening in his empire. This mystery creates a deeper layer in the story, making the audience question the true connection between them. Back at the refinery, Caleb begins to change in subtle ways. He becomes quieter, not out of fear, but out of calculation. He starts paying attention to details others ignore, the way people speak when they are confident, the way they behave when they are afraid, and the way power shifts in small moments. This transformation is not visible on the surface, but internally it is significant. Enzo, however, misinterprets this silence as weakness. He believes Caleb is finally accepting his position at the bottom. This misunderstanding gives Enzo more confidence, and he increases his attempts to humiliate Caleb publicly. But what Enzo does not realize is that silence is not always submission. Sometimes, silence is preparation. A key moment occurs when Caleb is forced to carry out a dangerous task at the refinery under harsh conditions. The environment is unstable, and even experienced workers hesitate. Caleb is given no choice. While others watch from a safe distance, he steps forward. This moment is not about bravery in a traditional sense, it is about endurance and necessity. During this task, something unexpected happens. Caleb manages to complete the work under extreme pressure, surprising those who expected him to fail. Even though it is not a moment of public recognition, it marks a subtle shift in how people begin to perceive him. For the first time, some workers start questioning whether Caleb is truly as weak as they assumed. Dominic observes this event carefully. Unlike others, he understands the deeper meaning behind it. To him, this is not just a successful task, it is evidence of internal transformation. Caleb is no longer just surviving, he is beginning to adapt to pressure in a controlled way. However, Dominic still does not reveal himself. Instead, he increases his observation. His plan is not to rush the process but to allow Caleb's growth to reach a natural point of realization. There is something strategic in his silence, as if every moment is part of a larger design. As the episode progresses, the emotional distance between Caleb and the world around him becomes more noticeable. He is physically present in the refinery, but mentally he is beginning to disconnect from the idea of being powerless. Something inside him is shifting, but it is still not fully formed. The episode ends with a quiet but powerful tension. Caleb stands alone after the long workday, looking at the refinery lights in the distance. Around him, everything feels unchanged, but within him, something irreversible has started. At the same time, far away, Dominic continues to watch, still silent, still hidden, and still waiting. The story is slowly moving toward a point where silence will no longer be enough. The story of Rey Oculto as Padre deepens further as the emotional and power struggles between Dominic and Caleb begin to collide more aggressively. After the shocking revelations from the previous part, Caleb is no longer the same innocent and struggling worker. Something inside him has started to shift. The humiliation, the rejection, and the constant pressure from people like Enzo have slowly turned into a silent fire of determination. But what Caleb still does not fully understand is the hidden layer of power surrounding his own life. His father Dominic is still watching everything from the shadows, carefully controlling situations without exposing his real identity. Dominic's approach remains calm, strategic, and almost invisible. He continues working in disguise, observing how Caleb reacts under pressure. Instead of directly saving him from every problem, Dominic intentionally allows certain struggles to happen. His belief is simple: real strength is not given, it is built through pain. This philosophy creates a silent emotional distance between father and son, even though they are closer than anyone realizes. Every hardship Caleb faces is secretly designed to prepare him for something much bigger in the future. At the refinery workplace, Caleb now faces even harsher treatment. Enzo becomes more aggressive after sensing Caleb's earlier resistance. He starts humiliating him in front of other workers, trying to break his confidence completely. The workplace atmosphere becomes increasingly toxic, filled with jealousy, class discrimination, and silent resentment. Some workers follow Enzo blindly, while others begin to quietly sympathize with Caleb but remain afraid to support him openly. Caleb's girlfriend's situation also adds emotional pressure. Misunderstandings grow between them as Enzo manipulates circumstances to create doubt. She begins questioning Caleb's future, his status, and his ability to provide stability. These emotional cracks hurt Caleb deeply because, despite everything, he genuinely cares for her. This part of the story shows how external pressure can slowly destroy personal relationships when trust is weakened. Meanwhile, Dominic observes these developments carefully. Instead of reacting emotionally, he analyzes every move. He notices Caleb's pain but chooses not to interfere directly. Instead, he subtly influences situations through business connections and hidden authority. A few key moments show workers being unexpectedly reassigned or supervisors suddenly changing behavior, hinting that someone powerful is silently balancing the system behind the scenes. The story then shifts toward a major turning point when a financial crisis hits the refinery. A hidden business conflict begins affecting operations. Rumors spread that the company might undergo restructuring or even partial shutdown. This creates panic among workers, especially those who depended on overtime wages. Enzo tries to take advantage of this chaos by positioning himself closer to management, hoping to secure personal benefit. Caleb, on the other hand, surprisingly steps up during this crisis. Despite his emotional stress, he starts showing leadership qualities. He organizes workers, suggests practical solutions, and even prevents a small accident in the refinery caused by negligence. This moment becomes important because for the first time, people around him begin to see him differently, not as a weak worker, but as someone capable of responsibility and decision-making. Dominic silently observes this transformation with satisfaction. He does not reveal his identity, but internally he acknowledges that Caleb is slowly becoming ready for bigger challenges. However, Dominic also notices a dangerous emotional pattern forming inside Caleb: anger. If not controlled, this anger could turn into recklessness, which is something Dominic wants to prevent. The emotional side of the story becomes stronger when Caleb confronts Enzo directly after another humiliation incident. This confrontation is not physical at first, but verbal and psychological. Caleb speaks with a new level of confidence, surprising everyone, including Enzo. For a brief moment, the power balance shifts. Enzo realizes that Caleb is no longer as easy to control as before. However, Enzo does not step back. Instead, he becomes more determined to destroy Caleb's reputation completely. In parallel, Dominic begins preparing a hidden plan involving the refinery's internal ownership structure. It is revealed that the refinery is not as simple as it appears. There are multiple layers of investors, secret contracts, and historical decisions tied to Dominic's past empire. Some of these connections hint that Caleb's current suffering is indirectly linked to old business conflicts that Dominic once faced. A new female character is introduced around this stage, bringing emotional balance and complexity to the narrative. She notices Caleb's struggles and treats him with respect, unlike others. Her presence slowly begins to stabilize Caleb's emotional condition. However, this also creates subtle tension in his existing relationship, adding another layer of emotional conflict to the story. As episodes progress, the narrative starts building toward a hidden truth. Small clues about Dominic's identity begin to surface: his behavior, his knowledge of business decisions, and his unexpected influence over certain events. Viewers are encouraged to connect these hints, though Caleb himself remains unaware. The theme of karma becomes more visible in this part. Characters who have acted selfishly or cruelly begin facing consequences in unexpected ways. Enzo's overconfidence starts creating problems for him internally, as some of his allies begin questioning his leadership. Meanwhile, those who showed kindness toward Caleb slowly begin receiving subtle rewards, even if they do not realize it immediately. The emotional intensity of the story increases as Caleb is forced to make a critical decision regarding his future at the refinery. He begins questioning whether he should continue enduring humiliation or take a risk and leave everything behind. This internal conflict represents the broader theme of self-worth versus survival. Dominic, watching this moment, finally intervenes indirectly by ensuring Caleb receives an opportunity, a chance to move into a more responsible position within the system. This is not revealed as fatherly help, but as a business opportunity arranged through hidden channels. Caleb sees it as luck, not realizing it as carefully designed guidance. The part ends with a powerful emotional tone. Caleb stands at a crossroads between pain and growth, while Dominic remains in the shadows, continuing to shape events without revealing the truth. Enzo, unaware of the bigger forces at play, prepares for another move, setting the stage for future conflict. This continuation strengthens the core themes of the drama: hidden identity, father-son emotional distance, karma, revenge, personal growth, and the slow transformation of an underestimated individual into someone powerful. As the story of Rey Oculto Padre moves into its next phase, the emotional weight becomes even heavier and the hidden power dynamics begin to tighten around every character. Caleb's new position at the refinery does not bring him peace; instead, it opens a completely new level of pressure. With responsibility comes visibility, and with visibility comes new enemies. Enzo, who previously underestimated Caleb, now feels challenged in a way that disturbs his ego deeply. Caleb's promotion is not officially celebrated, but it is noticed. Workers begin treating him differently, some with respect and others with hidden jealousy. Enzo's influence over the workforce starts to weaken slightly, which he cannot tolerate. Instead of backing down, he begins planning more carefully, using psychological manipulation instead of direct confrontation. He spreads rumors about Caleb's sudden rise, suggesting favoritism or hidden connections, trying to isolate him socially. Caleb, however, is still unaware of the deeper forces protecting him. He believes his progress is purely the result of hard work and a few lucky moments. This misunderstanding keeps him grounded but also vulnerable, because he does not fully understand the scale of the game he is now part of. Every step he takes forward is actually part of Dominic's long-term design, although Caleb cannot see it yet. Dominic continues operating in the background, quietly adjusting situations to keep Caleb on a controlled path of growth. He monitors both Caleb and Enzo closely, analyzing behavioral patterns, emotional triggers, and decision-making tendencies. Dominic understands that Enzo represents a type of destructive arrogance that thrives on unchecked power, while Caleb represents controlled strength that still needs refinement through struggle. At the same time, Dominic faces his own internal conflict. Watching his son suffer without revealing the truth is emotionally difficult, but he believes revealing himself too early would destroy Caleb's natural development. This silent sacrifice adds depth to Dominic's character, showing that his love is not expressed through comfort, but through carefully designed hardship. The refinery environment becomes increasingly unstable as financial pressure grows. Reports of budget cuts and restructuring plans create anxiety among workers. Enzo uses this chaos to strengthen his influence by pretending to have insider knowledge. He spreads selective information to create confusion, positioning himself as a necessary leader in uncertain times. Caleb, meanwhile, begins noticing inconsistencies in how decisions are made. Some approvals seem too fast, while others are unexpectedly blocked. He starts questioning the system more deeply, but he lacks the full picture. This curiosity pushes him into investigating internal operations quietly, which unknowingly brings him closer to discovering Dominic's hidden involvement. A turning point occurs when a major equipment failure threatens to shut down a section of the refinery. Panic spreads instantly. Workers rush to control the situation, but confusion makes it worse. Enzo tries to take command but fails to organize people effectively. In contrast, Caleb steps forward and calmly assesses the situation. Using logical thinking and quick coordination, he helps prevent a major disaster. This moment becomes a defining shift in perception. Even those who doubted Caleb begin recognizing his natural leadership ability. For the first time, Enzo is publicly overshadowed in a critical situation, and this humiliation deeply wounds his pride. His hatred toward Caleb transforms into something more dangerous: obsession. After the incident, Caleb is called into a formal review meeting. Management acknowledges his contribution, but instead of full praise, they remain cautious, as if someone is influencing their tone. Unknown to Caleb, Dominic has indirectly ensured that Caleb is acknowledged but not overexposed, keeping him balanced between recognition and humility. Emotionally, Caleb begins experiencing internal conflict. On one hand, he feels he is finally earning respect. On the other hand, he still feels trapped in a system that constantly controls outcomes beyond his understanding. His relationship with his girlfriend also becomes more fragile. She sees him growing in status but still does not fully trust the stability of his future. Their conversations become shorter, more uncertain, and emotionally distant. During this period, the new female character plays a stabilizing role. She encourages Caleb to think beyond immediate emotions and focus on long-term vision. Her presence becomes a quiet source of clarity in his chaotic life. However, this also increases emotional tension in his romantic relationship, creating a triangle of emotional uncertainty that develops slowly over time. Dominic, from the shadows, observes Caleb's emotional evolution carefully. He notices that Caleb is beginning to think independently, but still lacks awareness of hidden power structures. Dominic then initiates another silent move by influencing a business proposal connected to the refinery. This proposal, if accepted, could significantly change the ownership structure of the entire operation. Enzo, sensing instability, tries to insert himself into this proposal process by aligning with certain decision-makers. He believes controlling business decisions will secure his dominance again. However, he does not realize that the entire system is being subtly redirected by forces he cannot see. As negotiations begin, Caleb unexpectedly gets involved in discussions due to his growing technical knowledge. This surprises many senior staff members. For the first time, Caleb is not just seen as a worker but as someone who can contribute to strategic discussions. This creates a silent shift in hierarchy. Dominic sees this as a critical step. Caleb is now slowly entering the world of power without knowing its full depth. However, Dominic still does not reveal himself. Instead, he ensures Caleb remains in positions where he can learn, adapt, and grow without being destroyed by sudden exposure to truth. The emotional tone of the story deepens when Caleb faces a personal setback. A misunderstanding at work leads to false accusations of negligence. Enzo quietly fuels this situation, trying to push Caleb back into humiliation. Caleb is temporarily suspended pending investigation. This moment hits him emotionally harder than anything before because he feels betrayed by a system he tried to improve. During his suspension, Caleb experiences isolation. He begins reflecting on his journey, his struggles, and the strange pattern of events surrounding his life. This reflection slowly pushes him toward questioning whether his success and failures are truly random or controlled by something bigger. Dominic watches this phase carefully. He understands that doubt is necessary for awakening awareness. However, he also ensures Caleb does not fall into despair. Subtle interventions occur again, evidence begins surfacing that may prove Caleb's innocence. The episode ends with tension rising. Caleb stands at the edge of either breaking completely or rising into a new level of awareness. Enzo believes he has finally cornered him, but the hidden system controlled by Dominic begins preparing the next shift. This part of the story strengthens key themes: manipulation versus truth, hidden protection, emotional isolation, rising leadership, and the slow realization that every struggle is part of a larger design. Continue with Part 5, next 1,000 words. Part 5, continuation, next 1,000 words. The suspension of Caleb becomes a turning point that changes the emotional rhythm of Rey Oculto as mi Padre. For the first time, Caleb is completely removed from the active environment of the refinery. No daily tasks, no workplace conflicts, and no direct confrontations with Enzo. But instead of peace, he experiences something heavier: silence filled with self-doubt and reflection. At home, Caleb struggles to understand what went wrong. The accusation against him feels unfair, yet the system seems too strong for him to fight alone. He replays every moment in his mind, trying to find where things started to go against him. This mental loop slowly affects his confidence. The once determined young man begins to question his own judgment. Enzo, on the other hand, sees this suspension as a victory. He openly celebrates it within his circle, presenting it as proof that Caleb was never truly capable. However, beneath his arrogance, there is still insecurity. Enzo knows Caleb has changed over time. His fear is not that Caleb is weak, but that he is becoming stronger in ways Enzo cannot easily control. Dominic continues to observe everything from the background. Caleb's suspension was not unexpected to him; in fact, it was part of a controlled scenario designed to test emotional endurance. Dominic believes that real leadership is not built in moments of success but in how a person reacts when everything is taken away. During this period, Dominic subtly begins gathering proof related to Caleb's false accusation. Without revealing his identity or intentions, he uses his business influence to trace internal reports, digital logs, and worker testimonies. Slowly, inconsistencies begin to appear in the case against Caleb. Someone higher up had manipulated details to frame him. Meanwhile, Caleb meets the new female character again, who plays a crucial emotional stabilizing role. She does not try to fix his problems directly but helps him reframe his thinking. She tells him that truth is not always immediately visible, and sometimes silence is part of a larger process. These conversations slowly bring Caleb back from emotional collapse. At the same time, Caleb's girlfriend situation reaches a breaking point. She becomes frustrated with his suspended status and lack of clarity about the future. External pressure from her environment makes her distance herself emotionally. Although she still cares, fear of instability begins to dominate her decisions. This creates a painful emotional separation between them. Caleb experiences this rejection deeply. It is not just professional loss anymore, it becomes personal loss. This combination pushes him into a phase of emotional maturity. Instead of reacting impulsively, he begins to observe patterns more carefully. He starts questioning why so many events in his life seem too perfectly timed to be random. Dominic notices this change. Caleb is no longer just reacting emotionally, he is now analyzing. This is a critical stage in his transformation. Dominic understands that once Caleb starts thinking strategically, he is closer to understanding the hidden structure behind his struggles. Back at the refinery, Enzo attempts to solidify his control over the workforce. However, his leadership style becomes increasingly aggressive. Instead of inspiring people, he uses fear and manipulation. Some workers begin to quietly resist his influence, although they do not openly challenge him yet. A major shift occurs when internal audit teams start reviewing the suspension case. Unexpectedly, documents begin surfacing that contradict the official report. The evidence is subtle but powerful enough to reopen the investigation. Enzo becomes nervous as he realizes the situation might not be as stable as he thought. Caleb is called back for questioning. This moment is emotionally intense because he returns not as a worker but as someone under scrutiny. However, his behavior is different now. Instead of frustration, he responds with calmness and patience. This surprises the management team, who expected anger or desperation. During questioning, Caleb carefully explains his actions and provides clarity on events. His honesty creates a strong impression. For the first time, senior members begin seeing him as trustworthy rather than careless. However, the final decision is still pending, as the investigation is not fully complete. Dominic quietly ensures that certain missing pieces of evidence are restored. He does not directly interfere with people, but he manipulates systems, timelines, reports, and digital footprints. This subtle intervention begins shifting the balance of the case in Caleb's favor. Enzo realizes something unusual is happening. He senses that forces beyond his control are influencing the outcome. His confidence starts turning into paranoia. He begins investigating who might be supporting Caleb behind the scenes, but finds no clear answers. Emotionally, Caleb reaches a deeper realization during this phase. He understands that his life has never been fully under his control. There have always been patterns that do not make sense. This realization does not break him, instead, it makes him more curious and cautious. The female supporting character plays a key role again by encouraging Caleb to focus on growth instead of revenge. She warns him that obsession with enemies can destroy his future. Her perspective introduces balance into Caleb's emotional state, preventing him from falling into destructive thinking. Meanwhile, Dominic begins preparing a major shift in the refinery's ownership structure. A hidden business transition is being activated quietly. This move will not only affect Enzo but will also reveal deeper layers of Dominic's past empire connections. However, this transition is still hidden from everyone, including Caleb. As the investigation nears conclusion, evidence clearly begins pointing toward manipulation in Caleb's suspension case. The truth slowly surfaces, but not all details are revealed yet. The system that tried to remove Caleb is now under pressure. Enzo, feeling cornered, attempts a risky move. He tries to sabotage Caleb's reputation further by leaking false internal rumors. But this time, his actions start backfiring. People begin questioning his intentions instead of believing him blindly. The episode builds toward a tense emotional climax when Caleb is finally cleared of major allegations. Although not fully reinstated to his previous position yet, his name is officially restored. This moment becomes symbolic, truth slowly overpowering manipulation. Dominic watches this outcome with silent satisfaction. Caleb has passed another stage of controlled growth. However, Dominic knows the journey is far from over. The next phase will involve deeper truths, hidden identities, and emotional confrontation that cannot be avoided forever. The part ends with Caleb standing at a crossroads again, but this time, he is no longer the same person. He is more aware, more observant, and slowly beginning to sense that his life is connected to something much larger than he ever imagined. Themes in this part intensify: truth versus manipulation, emotional isolation, hidden protection, slow awakening of awareness, and the beginning of strategic thinking in Caleb's character development. After being cleared from the major allegations, Caleb returns to a workplace that no longer feels the same. Even though his name is restored, the atmosphere around him has permanently changed. People now look at him differently, not just as a worker, but as someone who survived a system designed to break him. This silent shift creates both respect and distance. Caleb notices that Enzo is no longer openly aggressive in the same way. Instead, Enzo has become quiet, calculated, and unpredictable. This change worries Caleb more than direct hostility ever did. He understands that a silent enemy is often more dangerous than an obvious one. At the refinery, management begins slowly reintegrating Caleb into operations. However, instead of returning him to his previous position, they assign him to a special internal coordination role. This role gives him exposure to different departments, financial planning systems, and operational decisions. On the surface, it looks like a promotion, but in reality, it is also a test. Dominic is the hidden reason behind this shift. Without revealing himself, he influences decision-makers to place Caleb in environments where he can grow intellectually and strategically. Dominic's intention is not just to protect Caleb, but to prepare him for leadership that goes beyond the refinery. Caleb begins adapting quickly to his new responsibilities. He learns how decisions are made at higher levels, how resource allocation works, and how small internal decisions can affect the entire system. This new knowledge slowly changes his mindset. He is no longer thinking like a worker, he is starting to think like a decision-maker. However, with growth comes pressure. Some senior staff members feel uncomfortable with Caleb's rapid rise. They begin testing him indirectly, assigning complex tasks with tight deadlines, expecting him to fail. Instead of breaking him, these challenges sharpen his focus. Enzo watches this development carefully. His frustration grows as Caleb continues to rise despite all obstacles. Enzo realizes that direct attacks no longer work. So he shifts strategy again, this time aiming to isolate Caleb socially within the organization. He begins influencing others subtly, creating doubt about Caleb's sudden importance. At the same time, Caleb's personal life continues to weaken. His girlfriend has now emotionally detached further. She begins avoiding serious conversations, creating distance without officially ending the relationship. This emotional gap leaves Caleb conflicted. He is progressing professionally but losing emotional stability. The new female character, however, continues to play a grounding role. She helps Caleb process his thoughts without emotional bias. She encourages him to focus on understanding systems rather than reacting to people. Her influence slowly becomes a key part of his emotional balance. Dominic continues observing all these developments silently. He is particularly focused on Caleb's emotional reactions. For Dominic, emotional control is more important than intelligence. He believes that leadership fails not because of lack of knowledge, but because of uncontrolled emotions. A new turning point arrives when the refinery announces a large-scale restructuring plan. This includes changes in leadership hierarchy, possible mergers, and redistribution of operational authority. The entire organization becomes unstable as rumors spread faster than official statements. Enzo sees this restructuring as an opportunity. He tries to position himself closer to decision-making circles by aligning with influential managers. His goal is clear: secure a permanent leadership role before the structure changes. Caleb, on the other hand, approaches the situation differently. Instead of chasing positions, he focuses on understanding the restructuring logic. He studies reports, analyzes patterns, and begins noticing inconsistencies in financial projections. This analytical behavior surprises his supervisors again. Dominic indirectly ensures that Caleb gains access to confidential strategic information not through illegal means, but through structured exposure. Caleb is placed in meetings where high-level discussions take place. Though he is not an official decision-maker, he is now present in spaces where decisions are shaped. During one critical meeting, Caleb identifies a major flaw in a proposed restructuring model. He respectfully presents his analysis, pointing out long-term risks. This moment becomes significant because senior executives begin taking his input seriously for the first time. Enzo, who is also present indirectly through his alliances, feels humiliated by Caleb's growing credibility. His frustration turns into deeper resentment. He starts planning a more aggressive move, but this time with higher stakes. Meanwhile, Dominic begins preparing the next phase of his hidden plan. He is aware that Caleb is approaching a point where truth about his identity may soon surface naturally. Instead of revealing himself, Dominic chooses to let events unfold until Caleb discovers the truth through evidence rather than explanation. Emotionally, Caleb reaches another internal shift. He begins questioning not just external systems, but his own past perceptions. He realizes that many of his struggles were too structured to be random. This thought creates both curiosity and discomfort. At home, Caleb becomes more withdrawn. He spends more time analyzing documents and thinking about hidden patterns. His emotional connection with his previous relationship continues to fade, not through conflict, but through silence. The new female character notices this shift and gently warns him not to lose his emotional balance completely. She tells him that understanding systems is important, but losing human connection can also lead to isolation. This advice creates a subtle emotional conflict within Caleb. Dominic observes this carefully. He knows Caleb is entering a dangerous phase, intellectual growth without emotional grounding. To balance this, Dominic subtly introduces opportunities where Caleb must make decisions involving human impact, not just logic. A major incident occurs when minor safety failure in the refinery leads to panic among workers. Although not catastrophic, it creates tension in the system. Caleb steps in quickly, organizing response efforts and preventing escalation. This reinforces his leadership presence again. Enzo tries to exploit this situation, blaming system failures on management inefficiency. However, his arguments lose impact as Caleb's actions during the crisis are widely recognized. The restructuring process then reaches a critical stage where final leadership decisions are being prepared. Caleb is unexpectedly invited to present a full analysis report. This moment marks a major turning point in his journey from observer to contributor. Dominic watches this moment closely. He understands that Caleb is now close to a stage where hidden truths can no longer remain buried. The system he built around protection and growth is slowly converging toward revelation. The episode ends with Caleb standing before senior leadership, preparing to present his insights. His confidence is steady, but internally he still feels a sense of uncertainty about the forces shaping his life. Enzo watches from the shadows, preparing his next move. And Dominic, still hidden, silently waits for the moment when Caleb will finally begin to see the truth that has been guiding him all along. This part deepens the themes of strategic growth, hidden guidance, emotional imbalance, system-level power, and the slow build-up toward identity revelation. The presentation room is unusually silent as Caleb steps forward. Senior executives, department heads, and restructuring consultants are all present. This is not just another meeting, it is a defining moment in the refinery's future. Caleb holds his report firmly, but his mind is far from calm. He is aware that whatever he says here could either elevate his position or completely destroy the fragile trust he has recently rebuilt. Enzo is also present, seated at the back with a controlled expression. He does not speak, but his eyes remain fixed on Caleb. Unlike before, there is no open hostility in his behavior. Instead, there is calculation. He is waiting for a mistake, a slip, anything that can be used later to weaken Caleb's influence again. Dominic is not physically present, but he is monitoring the situation through indirect channels. This moment is important to him not just as a business decision point, but as a psychological milestone for Caleb. He wants to see whether Caleb can stand under pressure without collapsing into emotional instability. Caleb begins his presentation with clarity and confidence. He explains the restructuring model, identifies operational risks, and highlights long-term inefficiencies in the proposed plan. His analysis is not overly technical, but it is precise and grounded in real observations. For the first time, the room listens not out of obligation, but genuine interest. As he continues, Caleb points out a critical flaw in resource allocation that could lead to long-term financial imbalance. This statement causes a visible reaction among senior executives. Some exchange glances, while others begin reviewing documents again. The atmosphere shifts slightly. Caleb is no longer being seen as just a junior voice. Enzo, however, tightens his expression. He did not expect Caleb to reach this level of clarity so quickly. In his mind, Caleb was supposed to remain a controlled, predictable worker, not someone capable of influencing structural decisions. The discussion becomes more intense as Caleb answers follow-up questions. He does not panic. Instead, he responds logically, sometimes even admitting limitations in his data where necessary. This honesty actually strengthens his credibility. The executives begin to see him as someone reliable rather than someone trying to impress. Dominic observes this mental transformation with silent approval. Caleb is showing a rare combination of humility and intelligence, something Dominic has been intentionally trying to cultivate through controlled hardship. However, the meeting takes an unexpected turn when a senior consultant challenges Caleb's assumptions aggressively. The consultant questions the validity of his data sources and suggests that his conclusions may be based on incomplete information. The room becomes tense again. For a moment, Caleb pauses. This is a critical pressure point. Instead of reacting emotionally, he takes a breath and carefully revisits his analysis. He acknowledges the limitation but reinforces his core argument with additional reasoning. This controlled response stabilizes the situation. Dominic recognizes this moment as a breakthrough. Caleb is no longer reacting like someone under pressure, he is responding like someone who understands pressure. After the meeting, Caleb is asked to stay behind for further discussion. Senior executives begin privately acknowledging that his input has added value to the restructuring plan. Although no final decision is made yet, Caleb's position within the organization has clearly changed. Outside the room, Enzo is not satisfied. He realizes that direct professional competition is no longer effective. Caleb is now being taken seriously at a level Enzo cannot easily influence. This pushes Enzo toward a more dangerous mindset. He begins considering indirect ways to destabilize Caleb's progress. Later that day, Caleb returns home mentally exhausted. The emotional weight of the meeting begins to settle in. He is proud of his performance, but also confused about how quickly everything around him is changing. His life no longer feels linear, it feels directed by invisible forces. The female supporting character meets him again during this period. She notices the emotional conflict in him immediately. Caleb explains his experience, not as victory, but as confusion. He feels like he is being placed into positions he never actively chose. She listens carefully and tells him something important, that growth often feels like loss of control before it feels like progress. This statement resonates deeply with Caleb, even if he does not fully understand why. Meanwhile, Dominic prepares another internal adjustment within the refinery system. A confidential audit is initiated regarding previous operational decisions. This audit indirectly connects to the earlier suspension case involving Caleb. Slowly, buried inconsistencies begin resurfacing. Enzo starts sensing pressure again. People who once supported him begin distancing themselves slightly. He cannot identify the source of the shift, but he feels it clearly. His confidence begins to erode, replaced by quiet paranoia. Caleb, however, remains unaware of the deeper political shifts. He continues focusing on learning, analyzing, and adapting. But internally, he is beginning to feel a strange pattern every time he rises. Something larger seems to be adjusting around him. Dominic watches this realization forming slowly in Caleb's mind. This is the beginning of awareness, the stage where a person starts questioning not just events, but the structure behind events. A new incident occurs when the audit team requests additional clarification from multiple departments. During this process, previously overlooked documents begin surfacing. Some of these documents indirectly point toward manipulation in internal decisions that affected Caleb earlier. Caleb is not informed about all details yet, but he begins noticing that certain names and patterns are repeating. This triggers curiosity rather than fear. He starts quietly investigating again, not out of revenge, but out of understanding. Enzo becomes increasingly restless. He tries to influence audit outcomes through indirect pressure, but this time his influence is weaker than before. The system around him is slowly tightening. Dominic ensures that the audit process continues without revealing his involvement. He allows truth to emerge gradually rather than forcing it. His goal is not immediate exposure, but controlled revelation. As the episode progresses, Caleb experiences a strange emotional shift. He begins feeling that his life is divided into two layers, what he sees, and what exists beneath what he sees. This awareness makes him more observant in daily interactions. He starts paying attention to details he previously ignored: tone of conversations, timing of decisions, and subtle behavioral changes in colleagues. This transformation marks a major step in his psychological evolution. The episode reaches its emotional peak when Caleb unexpectedly receives access to a restricted internal file due to his involvement in the restructuring analysis. Inside this file, he finds fragmented references that hint at decisions made outside normal channels. Although nothing is fully clear yet, the structure of information feels familiar, too organized, too intentional. This unsettles him slightly, but also deepens his curiosity. Dominic quietly monitors this moment. He understands that Caleb is now standing at the edge of discovery. The truth is no longer distant, it is beginning to reveal itself in fragments. The episode ends with Caleb staring at the document screen, silently processing information that does not fully make sense yet, but feels emotionally significant. Enzo, meanwhile, is shown in isolation, increasingly uncertain about his position. And Dominic remains in the shadows, aware that the next phase will no longer be about guidance, but revelation. Themes in this part intensify around awareness, hidden systems, psychological transformation, power imbalance, and the gradual breakdown of illusion versus truth. The moment Caleb stares at the restricted file marks a quiet but irreversible shift in the entire narrative of Rey Oculto as mi Padre. The document is not fully complete, yet it carries fragments of information that feel strangely connected to his past suspensions, workplace incidents, and sudden changes in his career trajectory. At first, Caleb tries to convince himself that it is just a coincidence. But the more he reads, the more patterns begin to emerge. Names of departments repeat in unusual contexts. Decision timestamps do not align logically. Certain approvals appear to have been influenced outside normal refinery protocols. Nothing is directly accusing anyone, yet everything points toward structured interference. Caleb closes the file for a moment, trying to process what he is seeing. For the first time, he feels that the system he trusted might not be as neutral as he believed. This thought creates discomfort, but also curiosity. Instead of fear, he begins feeling a need to understand the full structure behind these events. Dominic, from his hidden position, watches this psychological reaction carefully. This is the exact stage he was waiting for: not blind obedience, not emotional collapse, but analytical suspicion. Caleb is now starting to question reality itself, which is the first step toward uncovering truth. At the refinery, Enzo senses that something has changed again. Caleb is no longer just progressing professionally, he is now entering spaces of information that were previously inaccessible. Enzo does not know exactly what Caleb has seen, but he can feel the shift in atmosphere around him. People are no longer reacting to Enzo with the same confidence they once did. This makes Enzo more aggressive internally. He begins contacting certain individuals in management circles, trying to regain influence over internal decisions. However, what he does not realize is that the system is already shifting away from his control. His earlier advantage is slowly turning into isolation. Caleb, meanwhile, begins quietly re-examining past events. He reopens memories of his suspension, the accusations, and the sudden reversal of evidence. This time, he does not view them emotionally. Instead, he analyzes them like data points. This change in perspective is significant. It shows his transition from emotional reaction to strategic thinking. The female supporting character notices this shift in him. She observes that Caleb is becoming more distant emotionally, but more focused intellectually. She gently warns him that understanding truth is important, but becoming consumed by it can also change a person in ways they do not expect. Caleb does not fully respond, but he listens. Internally, he is already too deep into the pattern he has discovered. He cannot unsee what he has started to notice. Dominic begins another silent adjustment. He ensures that Caleb gains access to a second layer of internal reports, slightly more detailed, but still incomplete. These reports include references to external business influences connected to refinery decisions. However, names are partially redacted, creating intentional gaps in understanding. This controlled exposure is part of Dominic's plan. He wants Caleb to reach truth through gradual realization, not forced revelation. At the refinery, a sudden announcement is made: the restructuring audit has uncovered irregularities that require further investigation. This causes tension among senior staff. Some meetings are postponed, and decision-making slows down. The environment becomes unstable again. Enzo sees this as both a threat and an opportunity. He attempts to align himself with the investigation process, trying to position himself as someone who can help clarify internal matters. But his approach is now being met with caution rather than trust. Caleb is invited again to provide clarification regarding certain operational decisions. This time, however, the tone is different. Instead of questioning his credibility, the executives seem to be testing his awareness. They want to see how much he has understood beyond his assigned role. Caleb responds carefully. He does not reveal everything he has discovered, but he subtly references inconsistencies in system behavior. This surprises the panel again. It becomes clear that Caleb is no longer just an analyst, he is becoming an internal observer of the system itself. Dominic watches this evolution with quiet intensity. Caleb is approaching the boundary where independent reasoning could lead to dangerous truth discovery. But Dominic does not stop it. Instead, he prepares for the final stage of controlled revelation. Outside the refinery, Caleb begins experiencing emotional tension. His relationship with his girlfriend has now fully broken down into silence. There are no major confrontations, just distance and absence. This loss affects him, but not as deeply as before. Instead, it becomes secondary compared to the larger questions forming in his mind. The female supporting character remains a stabilizing influence. She tells Caleb that sometimes life removes emotional attachments when a person is being prepared for a larger purpose. Caleb does not fully agree, but he does not reject the idea either. He is now living in a state between emotional detachment and intellectual obsession. Enzo, on the other hand, begins showing signs of instability. His actions become less calculated and more reactive. He tries to regain control by confronting certain workers indirectly, but his influence is visibly weakening. People are no longer intimidated by him in the same way. A major moment occurs when Caleb receives an unexpected invitation to review a high-level historical project archive related to refinery expansion decisions. This archive contains older documents that are not part of current operations. When Caleb opens it, he notices familiar patterns, similar structural influences, similar decision behaviors, and recurring indirect references to external authority. Something about the structure feels deeply familiar, but he cannot fully connect it yet. Dominic observes this moment carefully. He understands that Caleb is now extremely close to recognizing the hidden framework that has been influencing his entire journey. But revealing everything too soon would destabilize him emotionally. Timing remains critical. Meanwhile, the audit investigation begins identifying subtle inconsistencies that point toward coordinated manipulation within the organization. Not enough to accuse anyone directly, but enough to suggest that decisions were influenced beyond official hierarchy. Enzo starts feeling cornered internally. He realizes that if these investigations continue, his past actions may be indirectly exposed. His confidence begins to shift into fear. Caleb, however, remains focused on understanding rather than accusing. His mindset is no longer about revenge or defense, it is about clarity. He wants to know why things happened the way they did, not just who did them. This emotional maturity marks another step in his transformation. The episode reaches a critical moment when Caleb finds a partially encrypted reference in the archive that appears to connect multiple past decisions. The structure of this reference feels intentional, almost like a coded system designed to guide understanding in stages. Caleb pauses, realizing that this is not random information, it feels structured. Dominic, watching from afar, understands that this is the point of no return. Caleb is now actively approaching the truth layer that Dominic has been carefully protecting for years. The episode ends with Caleb staring at the fragmented data, fully aware that something larger exists behind everything he has experienced, but still unable to see the full picture. Enzo is shown in growing isolation, losing influence. And Dominic remains hidden, silently preparing for the moment when Caleb will finally discover the truth not as a revelation from someone else, but as a realization built through his own journey. Themes in this part deepen into controlled revelation, systemic truth discovery, emotional detachment, power structure awareness, and psychological transformation toward full awareness. The silence inside the Dominion Oil Empire headquarters was heavier than usual that morning. Caleb stood near the glass wall overlooking the refinery operations below. What once looked like a confusing world of machines, workers, and noise had slowly started to feel familiar to him. Not comfortable, but understandable. And that understanding was becoming dangerous for the people who once underestimated him. Dominic had not revealed himself yet, but his presence was no longer invisible. Every decision Caleb made in the last few weeks had been subtly influenced by invisible guidance. A delayed shipment here, a corrected contract there, a warning that saved thousands of dollars in losses. Caleb thought it was luck. But Dominic knew it was preparation. This was the beginning of the shift. Meanwhile, Enzo was becoming impatient. His arrogance had always been loud, but now it was turning reckless. He couldn't accept that Caleb, the same man he humiliated daily, was suddenly being talked about in executive meetings. Rumors were spreading that Caleb had saved a failing refinery deal through unexpected insight. Enzo hated those words. Unexpected insight. Especially when attached to someone he considered beneath him. So he planned something bigger. That afternoon, Enzo arranged a public operations review inside the refinery. It was meant to embarrass Caleb in front of workers and management. A staged inspection where Caleb would be forced to explain technical details he was never trained for. Enzo expected failure, humiliation, maybe even termination. But what Enzo didn't know was that Dominic had already seen this moment coming. Caleb arrived at the site wearing standard work gear. No luxury, no authority symbols, just the same uniform as other workers. That was Dominic's rule from the beginning: never let wealth become a shield. Only knowledge and discipline should define him. The inspection began with Enzo walking through machines, pointing out minor flaws and exaggerating them into critical failures. The supervisors followed nervously. Caleb stood quietly at the back, observing more than speaking. Then Enzo turned sharply. "Caleb," he said loudly, "explain why production efficiency dropped by 12% this week." All eyes turned. It was a trap question. Not because the answer was unknown, but because it required reading multiple operational reports, something Caleb had not publicly been given access to. The workers looked at each other. Some smirked. Others waited for the collapse. Caleb stepped forward slowly. But instead of panic, he asked for a tablet. What happened next changed the atmosphere completely. Caleb didn't just answer. He analyzed. He broke down supply chain delays, cross-checked fuel inconsistencies, and identified a hidden calibration issue in one of the refinery units. His voice was steady, controlled, not emotional, not defensive. Just precise. The room slowly shifted. Even Enzo's expression changed slightly, though he tried to hide it behind anger. "That's impossible," Enzo snapped. "You don't have access to those reports." Caleb paused. And for a brief moment, something deeper showed in his eyes, not confidence, but awareness. As if he knew more than he was allowed to say. "I don't need access," he replied calmly. The pattern was visible. That sentence hit harder than expected. Because it wasn't just technical skill. It was perception. And Dominic, watching from a remote security feed, finally allowed a small breath of satisfaction. But this was not victory yet. It was exposure. Later that night, Dominic met Caleb indirectly through a coded communication system embedded in the refinery's internal network. Caleb thought it was just a system notification. But the message was personal. "Pressure increases clarity. You handled it correctly." Caleb stared at the screen for a moment longer than usual. Something about the tone felt different. Not corporate. Not automated. Almost human. He didn't respond. But something inside him started questioning the structure around him. Who was really guiding these outcomes? And why did it always feel like someone was watching, not to control him, but to test him? At the same time, Dominic made another move. He quietly blocked a hostile takeover attempt initiated by external investors who had been working with Enzo behind the scenes. These investors planned to destabilize the company, buy shares at a low price, and remove Dominic's remaining influence completely. But Dominic neutralized them without revealing himself. Contracts were reversed. Digital trails erased. Financial triggers activated. By morning, the entire plan collapsed. Enzo had no idea why his allies suddenly withdrew. But he felt the ground shifting beneath him. His confidence began to crack, not loudly, but subtly, like something breaking inside glass that hasn't shattered yet. And Caleb was standing in the center of that shift. That night, Caleb returned home exhausted. Not physically, but mentally. For the first time, he felt the weight of expectation without understanding its source. He sat alone, looking at his hands. They were no longer just hands of a worker. They were becoming something else. Elsewhere, Dominic finally spoke aloud, not to Caleb, but to himself. "The foundation is ready," he said quietly. "Now we see what survives pressure." Because this was no longer about hiding identity. It was about transformation. And transformation always comes with collapse before construction. The next phase was approaching. And neither Caleb nor Enzo had fully realized it yet. The real war had just begun. The refinery didn't feel the same the next morning. Something invisible had shifted in its rhythm. Workers noticed it without being able to explain it, like a machine that had started running too efficiently, too precisely, as if someone had tightened every loose screw overnight. Caleb noticed it too. But unlike others, he didn't assume it was coincidence anymore. Ever since the inspection incident, people around him had started behaving differently. Some avoided eye contact. Others spoke with unusual respect. A few even seemed cautious, as if unsure where his limits actually were. Enzo, however, was not cautious. He was furious. Inside his glass office overlooking the industrial yard, he replayed the inspection footage again and again. Caleb's calm voice. The correct diagnosis. The silence that followed. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Caleb was supposed to fail. That was the script Enzo had built in his mind for months. But the script was breaking. And Enzo hated broken systems. So he decided to escalate. He called an emergency executive meeting, this time not to humiliate Caleb in public, but to remove him completely from the operational chain. The argument was simple: Caleb had overstepped his role and was interfering with technical systems without authorization. But what Enzo didn't realize was that Dominic was already 3 steps ahead. That same morning, Caleb received an official summons to attend the meeting. He stood still for a moment after reading it. Something in the tone felt heavier than usual. This wasn't routine. This was a decision point. He didn't know why, but he felt it clearly. This meeting would change everything. When he entered the executive hall, the atmosphere immediately tightened. Long table. Sharp suits. Controlled expressions. Enzo sat at the far end, calm on the surface, but his fingers tapped lightly against the table, betraying tension. Caleb took his seat without speaking. The meeting began with accusations disguised as concerns. You have been accessing operational insights beyond your clearance level. You have disrupted workflow analysis. You are creating confusion among staff by acting outside your role. Each sentence was carefully designed. Not aggressive enough to trigger defense, but sharp enough to isolate. Caleb listened quietly. Then it was Enzo's turn. And he smiled. This is not personal, Enzo said smoothly, but structure exists for a reason. We cannot allow instability in a high-value environment. A pause. Then the final strike. We recommend immediate suspension pending investigation. Silence followed. Caleb didn't react immediately. He looked around the room. Every face avoided his gaze except 1 or 2 who looked uncertain. Then he spoke. Suspension based on what exactly? He asked calmly. Performance improvement or discomfort with results you didn't expect? The room shifted slightly. Enzo leaned forward. Don't twist this into emotion. This is procedure. Caleb nodded slowly, but something in his expression changed. Not anger. Not fear. Awareness. For the first time, he wasn't responding as someone defending himself. He was analyzing the system itself. And somewhere beyond the visible room, Dominic was watching everything in real time. This was a pressure test. Not for Caleb's job. For his identity. Caleb continued. If procedure is the reason, he said, then let's follow it completely. Audit all my decisions, all my interventions, all outcomes I influenced. If I exceeded authority, it will show. If I didn't, then this meeting is not about structure. A pause. Then it is about discomfort. That word landed heavily. Discomfort. Because everyone in that room knew what it meant, but no one wanted to admit it. Enzo's jaw tightened. This is not a debate. But Caleb didn't stop. It feels like one, he said quietly. The room went still again. And then something unexpected happened. One of the senior supervisors, an older man who had rarely spoken in meetings, cleared his throat. I've reviewed his recent contributions, he said carefully. There is no procedural violation in what he did during the refinery incident. A second voice followed. And production stability improved after his intervention. Then another. He may have exceeded expectations, but not authority. The balance began to shift. Not dramatically, but enough. Enzo felt it immediately. Control slipping. That was when Dominic activated the final layer. A secure internal audit file was released into the system. Not publicly. Not loudly. Just enough for decision-makers to see. It showed something critical, Enzo's private involvement in unauthorized external negotiations that could have compromised the refinery's ownership structure. The room changed instantly. Now Enzo wasn't the one questioning Caleb. He was the one being observed. His expression froze for a fraction of a second before he forced a smile. This is irrelevant, he said quickly. Completely unrelated. But the damage had already started. Caleb noticed the shift, but not the source. He only saw reactions. Whispers. Changed posture. Avoided confidence. Something was happening behind the curtain. The meeting ended abruptly. No suspension. No removal. Just silence and uncertainty. After everyone left, Caleb remained seated for a moment longer. He didn't celebrate. He didn't relax. He felt something deeper instead. Like the ground beneath him was no longer stable, but intentionally unstable. As if he was being guided through collapse, not chaos. Outside, Enzo stood alone in the corridor. For the first time, he wasn't angry. He was calculating survival. And far away, in a controlled hidden environment, Dominic finally spoke again, not to anyone in the room, but into the system that connected everything. Pressure increased. Response confirmed, he said quietly. Caleb was adapting. Not just surviving. Adapting. And that was the real objective. Because what Dominic was building was not a replacement heir, not a corporate successor, and not a hidden identity operation. It was transformation under pressure. And transformation always breaks something before it builds something stronger. The next phase was no longer about exposure. It was about choice. And Caleb was about to face the first real one he couldn't solve with logic alone. For the first time since entering Dominion Oil's inner circle, Caleb didn't go straight home after work. He stayed inside the refinery complex long after the official shift ended, standing near the maintenance corridor where the noise of machines softened into a distant hum. The building felt different now, not just a workplace, but something layered. Like there were visible systems, and invisible ones running underneath them. And he was beginning to notice both. The meeting from earlier still replayed in his mind. Not the arguments. Not Enzo's anger. But the shift in the room when evidence appeared. The way control dissolved without anyone openly declaring it. Something had intervened. Caleb didn't know what. But he knew it wasn't random. He leaned against the cold metal railing and exhaled slowly. For months, his life had been simple in structure, even if painful. Work. Endurance. Survival. Now everything was expanding too fast. Too organized. As if his life had entered a system he didn't design. A faint vibration broke his thoughts. His device lit up with a single message. Meet at upper storage level. No witnesses. No signature. No identity. Just instruction. Caleb stared at it for a long moment. He should have ignored it. Any rational worker would. Anonymous instructions inside a high-security industrial site were not normal. They were dangerous. But Caleb didn't feel danger. He felt familiarity. As if this wasn't the first time something unseen had guided him. He moved. The upper storage level was rarely used at night. Long corridors, dim emergency lighting, and the constant low echo of pipes created a space that felt suspended outside normal operations. When Caleb arrived, no one was visible. For a moment, he wondered if it had been a trap. Then the lights shifted slightly. Not brighter. More focused. And a door at the far end unlocked with a soft mechanical click. He walked forward carefully. Inside was a small control room older than the rest of the facility, almost preserved. Screens displayed refinery data streams, security feeds, operational logs. But none of it was active. Except one terminal. It was already on. Waiting. Caleb stepped closer. And then he heard it. A voice. Not coming from speakers. But from behind him. Do you feel it yet? Caleb turned immediately. No one was there. The voice continued. Not confusion. Not fear. I'm asking about recognition. A pause. Caleb spoke carefully. Who are you? Silence stretched for a moment too long. Then. You already know me in fragments. That sentence hit differently. Not like a threat. Like confirmation. Caleb looked back at the terminal. A single file was open. His name wasn't on it. Instead, there were patterns, charts of his decisions, moments of intervention, performance spikes, emotional responses mapped over time. He felt a chill that wasn't physical. This is surveillance, he said firmly. No, the voice replied. This is observation without distortion. Caleb's jaw tightened. Same thing, different language. A soft pause. Then. Correct. But intention matters. That made him stop. Because intention was exactly what he couldn't see yet. Caleb took a step closer to the screen. What do you want from me? The voice didn't answer immediately. When it did, it changed everything. Choice. A pause. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Simple. Your life has been structured by environments that reward compliance or rebellion, the voice continued. But neither creates clarity. Only reaction. Caleb frowned. You've been influencing my decisions. Incorrect, the voice replied. I've been removing noise. That phrase stayed in the air longer than expected. Removing noise. Caleb didn't respond immediately. He looked at the data again. His life, mapped like a system. Not judged. Not praised. Just analyzed. Why me? He asked finally. This time, the answer came softer. Because you didn't break under pressure. You adapted. A pause. An adaptation reveals potential more accurately than comfort ever could. Caleb felt something tighten inside him, not fear exactly, but awareness of scale. Whatever this was, it was far beyond corporate rivalry or refinery politics. This was structured observation. Intentional shaping. He stepped back. If you're influencing my environment, he said, then nothing I choose is real. A short silence. Then. That is the first false assumption you've made tonight. Caleb's eyes narrowed. And then the voice added something unexpected. You still have full autonomy. We only adjust probability, not outcome. That sentence confused him more than it comforted him. Probability manipulation is still control, he said. No, the voice replied. Control removes alternatives. We increase them. A contradiction. But not an obvious one. Caleb didn't answer immediately. Because something about it wasn't entirely irrational. Before he could continue, another screen lit up. A file titled Option Event, Phase 1. Below it were two paths. Not instructions. Choices. Path A, public escalation of Enzo's internal misconduct file. Path B, silent containment and internal restructuring support. Caleb stared at it. This is about Enzo, he said slowly. Yes. And you want me to decide his fate? A pause. No, the voice corrected. We want you to decide your direction. That distinction mattered. And he knew it. Because for the first time, the system wasn't forcing him. It was exposing consequence layers. If he chose exposure, Enzo would fall publicly, but the organization would destabilize, and Caleb would become a visible threat. If he chose containment, Enzo would remain, but under correction, and Caleb would stay hidden within the system's structure. Neither option was safe. Both carried transformation. Caleb stepped away from the screen. I don't understand what game this is, he said quietly. It isn't a game, the voice replied. Games have winners. This is calibration. That word stayed in his mind. Calibration. Caleb turned back. If I refuse both? A pause. Then the most human-sounding response yet. Then you return to uncertainty. The state you call normal. Silence followed. For the first time, Caleb realized something important. The decision wasn't about Enzo. It was about what kind of force he would become inside this system. A visible disruptor. Or an invisible stabilizer. Neither was neutral. Both had weight. And somewhere beyond the room, Dominic observed quietly. This was the moment he had been preparing for, not obedience, not talent, but judgment under incomplete truth. Because power was not built when answers were clear. It was built when consequences were real and visibility was partial. Caleb finally spoke. I need time. The voice didn't resist. Granted. But understand, time does not pause the system. It only extends exposure. The screen dimmed. And silence returned. Caleb walked out of the control room slowly, carrying something heavier than before, not knowledge, but awareness that his next decision would not just affect his life inside the refinery. It would define what he became inside the structure he didn't yet fully understand. And for the first time, he wasn't sure whether he was being guided. Or shaped. Behind him, unseen systems continued running. And somewhere deeper than anyone could see, Dominic adjusted the next phase. Because now, Caleb was no longer just surviving pressure. He was beginning to generate it. Continue with part 12, next 1,000 words. Not because he was afraid of the decision, but because his mind refused to treat it like a normal choice. Everything about it felt structured in a way that didn't match his past experiences. In his old life, decisions were simple: endure or escape, accept or resist. But this was different. Both paths were designed to matter. And that changed everything. By morning, the refinery returned to its usual rhythm, but Caleb saw it differently now. Machines didn't just operate, they depended on decisions. Workers didn't just follow shifts, they moved inside systems of unseen influence. Even silence felt engineered. He kept replaying the two options in his mind. Expose Enzo. Or contain him. But every time he tried to simplify it, the system behind it expanded in complexity again. At exactly 9 a.m., Caleb was called to Enzo's office. This time, there was no arrogance in the summons. It was controlled, careful, almost cautious. When Caleb entered, Enzo didn't immediately speak. He was sitting behind his desk, but his posture was different than before, less relaxed, more calculated. The confidence was still there, but it wasn't effortless anymore. It was maintained. That difference was important. "You've been getting attention," Enzo said finally. Caleb didn't respond. Enzo leaned back slightly. "People are talking. Management is reconsidering structures. All because of a few lucky assessments." Still no reaction. That silence irritated Enzo more than resistance would have. "You think you're untouchable now?" Enzo asked. Caleb finally spoke, calm and direct. "I think the system is responding to information." A slight pause. Enzo smiled, but it wasn't natural. "There is no system responding to you. There are people interpreting outcomes." Caleb studied him carefully. For the first time, he noticed something subtle. Enzo wasn't just trying to dominate him anymore. He was trying to understand him. That was new. And dangerous. Before Caleb could respond, a notification appeared on Enzo's screen. He glanced at it briefly, and for a fraction of a second, his expression changed. Not anger. Alarm. But he quickly hid it. "You're dismissed," Enzo said sharply. Caleb didn't move immediately. Instead, he said something unexpected. "Do you know why I was brought here?" Enzo frowned. "Excuse me?" Caleb continued. "Not hired. Not assigned. Brought here." A long silence followed. Enzo stood up slowly. "Careful. You're starting to sound like someone who believes too much about himself." Caleb nodded slightly. "I'm starting to notice patterns that don't match coincidence." That sentence lingered in the room. Then Caleb left. But Enzo didn't sit back down immediately after he left. Instead, he opened a hidden secure channel on his system, something not registered in official company infrastructure. His fingers moved quickly, tense now. He typed only one line. Phase observation increased. Subject is becoming aware. A response came almost instantly. Containment probability decreasing. Adjust approach. Enzo exhaled slowly. So it was real. Not just intuition. Not just paranoia. Something was actively shaping Caleb's trajectory. And Enzo was not part of the design. That realization changed him. Not into someone calmer, but someone more dangerous. Meanwhile, Caleb returned to the refinery floor. But now everything felt slightly different. Conversation stopped when he passed. People looked at him longer than before. Not respect exactly. Not fear either. Something in between. Uncertainty. That was new territory for him. He walked toward the control section where production metrics were monitored. A junior technician hesitated before speaking to him. "Sir, your access level has been temporarily updated." Caleb paused. "By whom?" The technician looked uncomfortable. "It just appeared in the system." Caleb didn't respond immediately. This wasn't Enzo's doing. He could feel that much. It was the system again. Or whatever was behind it. He accessed the updated dashboard. Now he could see broader operational data, distribution networks, refinery efficiency layers, financial projections. Things far above his role. This wasn't permission. It was exposure. As if someone wanted him to see more, without telling him why. That was when the second message arrived. Not on his personal device, but directly inside the system interface. Decision window closing soon. Caleb stared at it. No explanation. No context. Just pressure. He leaned slightly closer to the screen. "Who are you?" he typed. A pause. Then. "Observer." That answer again. But this time Caleb didn't accept it. Observers don't intervene, he typed back. Another pause. Then something unexpected. True observers don't. False stability requires adjustment. That sentence made Caleb stop completely. False stability. He turned slightly away from the screen, thinking. If everything around him was stable only because it was being adjusted, then nothing he was reacting to was truly organic. Even conflict might be constructed. Even Enzo. The thought unsettled him more than anything before. Because it meant his anger, his effort, his struggle, could all be responses to controlled stimuli. And that would make him predictable. Or worse, useful. That evening, Dominic initiated a private analysis sequence. From his hidden monitoring environment, he reviewed Caleb's behavioral patterns over the last 72 hours. Not just actions, but hesitation points, emotional fluctuations, decision delays. The system generated a probability curve. Caleb was approaching divergence. That meant one thing. He was beginning to question the architecture itself. Dominic leaned back slightly. That's faster than expected, he murmured. A second layer of analysis opened. Enzo's response trajectory. Aggression rising. Control attempts increasing. Containment strategies failing. Dominic closed his eyes briefly. This wasn't just about Caleb anymore. It was about system equilibrium. If Enzo collapsed too early, instability would spread across the refinery network. If Caleb was pushed too fast, he would reject structure entirely. Both outcomes were undesirable. Which meant the next intervention had to be subtle. Not corrective. Directional. Dominic typed a single instruction into the system. Introduce controlled conflict variable. Maintain ambiguity of source. The system confirmed. Back at the refinery, Caleb was walking home when his device vibrated again. This time, the message was different. Not a command. Not an option. A warning. Trust will be tested tomorrow. No signature. No context. Just that. Caleb stopped walking. For a moment, he looked around at the city lights, the distant industrial glow behind him. Everything felt connected now. Even silence felt like communication. He finally exhaled slowly. Whatever was happening, it was no longer passive observation. It was preparation. And he was inside it. Whether he agreed or not. Behind him, unseen systems adjusted once again. And somewhere far deeper than visible infrastructure, Dominic confirmed the next phase initiation. Because Caleb was no longer just reacting to pressure. He was becoming part of the structure that created it. The next morning didn't feel like a normal morning anymore. Caleb noticed it the moment he stepped into the refinery gates. The air was the same, the machines were the same, the workers were the same, but the tone of everything had changed again. Like a system that had been quietly updated overnight without anyone announcing it. People were talking less. Watching more. And reacting slower. As if they were waiting for something to happen instead of just doing their jobs. Caleb felt it too. That message from last night stayed in his mind. Trust will be tested tomorrow. Trust in what? In whom? That question followed him all the way into the main control floor. Before he could settle into his station, a senior supervisor approached him. There's an urgent joint operation review today, the supervisor said. You're required in the executive coordination hall. Caleb nodded once. No surprise. No resistance. But internally, something tightened. Another controlled event. Another structured moment. And now, trust was part of it. The coordination hall was larger than the previous executive room. Screens lined the walls showing refinery output, logistics flow, and security overlays. But today, there was something unusual. External partners were present. Investors. Third-party consultants. People who did not belong to the internal hierarchy. And at the center of it all, Enzo sat with a calm expression that looked rehearsed. Caleb entered quietly and took his seat at the side. The meeting began immediately. A consultant stood up and projected a report. Recent efficiency gains in Section C are linked to an unidentified internal influence, he said. We have reason to believe unauthorized decision routing may be occurring. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. Unauthorized decision routing. That phrase didn't exist in normal operational language. It was engineered. Enzo spoke next. We believe certain individuals are bypassing established control chains, he said, carefully not looking directly at Caleb. This creates instability in governance. Caleb now understood. This wasn't about performance. This was about framing. A slow construction of perception. Not accusation yet, but preparation for one. Then the consultant added. To proceed transparently, we require confirmation of internal trust alignment. A verification protocol will be conducted. A document appeared on the screen. A digital agreement. Caleb read the title. Operational Trust Verification Protocol, Level 2. It required selected personnel to approve each other's system integrity. Mutual verification. A closed loop. Caleb understood instantly what it meant. If he signed, he was agreeing that Enzo and the system were both trustworthy. If he refused, he would appear as the unstable variable. Either way, the system would interpret him. Not neutrally, but strategically. Enzo finally looked at him directly. This is standard procedure, he said. Nothing personal. But his eyes said something else. This was not standard. This was targeted containment. Caleb stayed silent for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, who initiated this protocol? The consultant answered quickly. Corporate Governance Board. But Caleb noticed something. A hesitation before the answer. A fraction too long. A slight misalignment. That was enough. Because now he knew it wasn't purely corporate. It was being shaped in real time. Externally structured, internally guided. By someone. Or something. A notification appeared on Caleb's internal interface. Only visible to him. Trust decision required. 2 options. Approve Enzo's operational integrity. Flag inconsistency in governance alignment. Caleb's fingers didn't move immediately. Because this was no longer just about Enzo. It was about the system forcing binary alignment again. But this time, it used trust as the mechanism. Not logic. Not performance. Trust. And trust was the most dangerous variable in any control structure. He glanced briefly at Enzo. For a moment, something unexpected happened. Enzo wasn't looking confident anymore. He was watching Caleb carefully. Not as a rival, but as a trigger point. That realization changed Caleb's interpretation of everything. Enzo wasn't fully in control of this either. He was part of it. Or trapped in it. Maybe both. Caleb exhaled slowly. And made his choice. He did not approve. He did not reject directly either. Instead, he selected a third option hidden in the system interface. Request full trace transparency before validation. The room paused. The consultant frowned. That option is not typically used at this level, he said. Caleb responded calmly. Then it should be removed if it creates uncertainty. A subtle pressure shift filled the room. Because now Caleb had done something neither side fully expected. He didn't refuse the system. He challenged its structure. Enzo's expression tightened slightly. This was not how it was supposed to go. A silent ripple moved through the executive team. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked intrigued. And some looked cautious. Because Caleb had not broken the protocol. He had exposed its dependency on assumptions. Outside the visible room, Dominic monitored everything. And for the first time, he did not intervene immediately. Instead, he observed. Because Caleb had reached a critical stage. He was no longer just adapting. He was beginning to reinterpret structure itself. Dominic spoke quietly to the system. Response? The analysis returned. Subject demonstrates structural questioning behavior. Trust-based manipulation decreasing effectiveness. Recommend escalation of complexity. Dominic paused. Then nodded slightly. Proceed, he said. Back in the room, the consultant adjusted the approach. Very well, he said. We will proceed with trace verification. The screen shifted. Data streams began to load. But something was wrong. Not obviously. Subtly. A delay. A mismatch. Caleb noticed it immediately. The system was not revealing full transparency. It was filtering. And now he had confirmation. This entire protocol was not about trust. It was about shaping perception of trustworthiness. Enzo was still watching him. Waiting. Caleb understood now what Enzo wanted. Not approval. Not rejection. A mistake. A reaction that could be framed. But Caleb did something unexpected. He stood up. Slowly. Calmly. And said, "This system is incomplete." Silence. He continued. And incomplete systems cannot evaluate trust accurately. A pause. Then, I cannot validate or reject something that is not fully visible. That sentence shifted the room again. Because it was no longer resistance. It was structural critique. And systems do not like being questioned at their foundation. The consultant looked unsettled. Enzo's jaw tightened. For the first time, the balance was no longer in Enzo's favor. But Caleb didn't know that. He only knew one thing. Something was testing him. And the test was not over yet. That night, Caleb returned home again, but sleep didn't come. Instead, another message arrived. Short. Direct. You passed the trust test. But trust was never the objective. Caleb stared at it for a long time. Then another line appeared. Next phase, perception control. And finally, you are now part of the system you questioned. Caleb slowly lowered the device. Outside, the city lights flickered faintly through his window. And somewhere far beyond visible structures, Dominic confirmed the transition. Caleb was no longer being tested for obedience. He was being tested for influence. And that meant one thing. The real conflict had now begun. Caleb didn't move for a long time after reading the message. You are now part of the system you questioned. It didn't feel like a promotion. It didn't feel like recognition either. It felt like something had quietly crossed a boundary without asking for permission. The room around him was still the same dim light, distant refinery hum, the faint vibration of the city outside, but his perception of it had changed again. Like someone had adjusted the focus of a lens he didn't control. For the first time, Caleb didn't think about Enzo. He thought about the system itself. Not as a tool. Not as a company structure. But as something that could observe intention. And maybe even respond to it. That idea stayed with him longer than he expected. The next morning, everything inside Dominion Oil behaved normally on the surface, but underneath, there was a subtle recalibration happening. Caleb noticed it in small things. A delay in system approvals that used to be instant. A few extra seconds before data loaded. A slight hesitation in automated routing decisions. It wasn't malfunction. It was attention. Something was watching him more closely now. Not blocking him. Studying him. At the refinery floor, workers acted as they always did, but Caleb felt the difference in how conversations paused when he entered a space. Not fear exactly. Not respect either. Recognition of change. He was no longer invisible in the system. but he also wasn't fully defined. That made people uncertain. And uncertainty spreads faster than information. Enzo, on the other hand, was no longer pretending calm. Inside his office, he reviewed the outcome of the trust protocol failure again and again. Officially, nothing had failed. But nothing had succeeded either. The system had refused to finalize judgment after Caleb's intervention. That had never happened before. Enzo leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "This isn't normal escalation," he muttered. He opened a private channel. The same encrypted line he had used before. Subject is destabilizing structured evaluation layers. Intervention required. The reply came quickly. Intervention already in motion. Continue observational pressure. Enzo frowned. Observational pressure. That meant one thing. They weren't stopping Caleb. They were shaping him through resistance. And Enzo was part of that resistance layer. Whether he liked it or not. That realization didn't calm him. It made him more aggressive. Meanwhile, Caleb was called to a new location. Not the refinery. Not the executive hall. A neutral facility used for system calibration audits. When he arrived, the environment felt intentionally blank. White lighting. Minimal design. No corporate branding. No emotional cues. Just structure. A voice greeted him through an interface. "Welcome, Caleb." No person visible. Just presence. "We are initiating phase perception review." Caleb stood still. "This again?" he asked. "No," the voice replied. "This is not a test of decision-making." A pause. "This is a test of interpretation." The word interpretation immediately caught his attention. Because that wasn't about action. It was about meaning. The screen activated. 3 separate scenarios appeared. Each one showed a different version of the same event involving Enzo, refinery decisions, and Caleb's interventions. But each version told a different story. In one version, Caleb was a disruptive threat. In another, he was a necessary corrective force. In the third, he was neither, just a variable being used by competing internal systems. Caleb frowned slightly. These are all different narratives of the same events. Yes, the system replied. Which one is correct? A pause. Then the answer. All of them. That was the moment something shifted inside Caleb, not emotionally, but cognitively. Because if multiple interpretations were valid simultaneously, then truth wasn't fixed. It was assigned. He stepped closer. Then what am I supposed to do with this? The response came slower this time. You are supposed to choose how you will be interpreted. Caleb went quiet. That wasn't decision-making anymore. That was identity construction. Outside the visible system layer, Dominic observed the response carefully. Caleb was reaching a threshold. Not of intelligence, but of perception fatigue. When someone realizes too many layers of interpretation exist, they either collapse into confusion or begin rejecting the framework entirely. Dominic adjusted the system slightly. Not to guide Caleb, but to prevent premature collapse. Because Caleb was not ready yet for full structural awareness. Not while Enzo was still unstable. Back inside the facility, Caleb finally spoke. If I choose none of these interpretations? A pause. Then, you will be assigned default classification. Caleb understood immediately. Default classification meant the system would decide for him. He nodded slowly. So even this choice is controlled. No, the voice corrected. The choice is yours. The consequence is shared. That distinction mattered. And it made everything heavier. Caleb looked at the 3 scenarios again. Each one felt incomplete in different ways. Each one was true depending on what angle was prioritized. And that was the trap. Not deception, but selective visibility. After a long silence, Caleb made his move. I reject all three interpretations. A pause. Longer than before. The system responded. Rejection recorded. State, undefined observer alignment. Caleb frowned. What does that mean? The answer came softly. It means you are no longer being evaluated as an outcome. A pause. You are now being evaluated as a reference point. That sentence landed differently. Because reference points don't get judged like participants. They reshape the system around them. Caleb took a slow breath. What happens next? And for the first time, the system didn't answer immediately. When it did, it was simple. Now the system watches how others react to you. At the same time, Enzo received an alert. Not from Caleb. Not from management. But from internal analytics. A new classification had appeared next to Caleb's profile. Perception Anchor Candidate. Enzo stared at it. Anchor, he said quietly. That wasn't a worker designation. That wasn't even a managerial category. That was structural language. It meant influence beyond hierarchy. He stood up immediately. This is getting out of control, he muttered. But deep down, something worse was forming. Not just anger. Replacement fear. Because anchors don't compete with others. They replace frameworks of interpretation. And that made Caleb far more dangerous than Enzo had ever imagined. That night, Caleb walked alone again. But this time, the messages didn't come as instructions. They came as reflections. Different systems across the refinery began reacting differently to him. Some processes improved when he was near. Some slowed down. Some recalibrated themselves entirely. It was as if the system didn't know how to define him anymore. And in that undefined space, he was beginning to expand. Caleb stopped walking for a moment and looked at the refinery lights in the distance. For the first time, he understood something clearly. He was no longer inside the system. The system was now adjusting itself around him. And somewhere beyond visible control layers, Dominic made the final observation of the cycle. Subject no longer reacts to structure. A pause. Structure now reacts to subject. And in that moment, the experiment stopped being about control and became about evolution.